You're holding us back, Catherine. Eric's hand hit the kitchen table hard enough to shake the coffee mugs. His voice was calm, but sharp, the kind that cuts without needing to rise. Paula didn't even flinch. She just looked at me the way people look at a mess they've decided someone else should clean. I stared at the wood grain under my fingers. It was easier than looking at their faces. Eric leaned back in his chair. We could clear everything if you just agreed to sell the house. One signature. You'd still get your share. Paula crossed her arms. She doesn't care about family, Eric. She just wants to sit here with her memories and rot. I said quietly, It's not just a house. It's Mom and Dad's home. Paula laughed under her breath. You mean your home? You moved in before the funeral was cold. Her words didn't surprise me. Nothing she said ever did. What hurt was how normal this had become, the small cruelties that filled the silence between us. Eric poured himself more coffee like he hadn't just accused me of ruining his life. You know the bank's breathing down my neck. I can't keep paying on that loan forever. You shouldn't have borrowed that money in the first place, I said. He looked at me like I just insulted him in public. I did it for the family business. You benefited from that too. No, I said. You did it for your car lot. I was still working double shifts at the hospital when you took that loan. Paula's eyes narrowed. You think you're better than us because you played nurse to dying people? That house is falling apart, Catherine. You could live anywhere. I glanced at the peeling wallpaper behind her. She was right about the decay, but wrong about everything else. This place isn't for sale, I said. Eric's jaw tightened. You'll regret that. He pushed away from the table and walked toward the door. Paula followed, whispering something I couldn't hear. The screen door slammed. For a few seconds, the only sound was the clock ticking above the stove. I sat there, still holding my cup, watching the steam fade. I thought about how often I'd been in the same kitchen, cooking for them, patching their problems, lending money that never came back. Being the one who stayed didn't make me noble. It just made me convenient. When I finally stood up, the chair legs scraped against the floor like the sound of something ending. I cleaned the table the way Mom used to. Slow circles, steady hands. Because it was the only thing I could control. The sunlight outside had that washed-out winter look that makes everything seem colder. I could still see the tire marks where Eric's truck had spun in the driveway. I went to the sink, turned on the faucet, and let the water run. My reflection in the window looked tired, older than 52 should look, maybe because the house had aged with me. I whispered to myself, You're not selling. It wasn't defiance. It was a promise. If you've ever been cornered by your own family, you'll understand why I had to stay silent then. But stay with me, because silence doesn't last forever. I'm Catherine Ford, a retired nurse. I live in the same Nebraska farmhouse where I grew up, surrounded by fields that go quiet after dusk. My parents left this place to all three of us, but I was the one who stayed when they got sick, the one who cleaned up after the funeral, the one who never left. For years, that loyalty was treated like a weakness. Maybe it was. Maybe that's why Eric thinks he can still order me around. I walked through the hallway, touching the photographs that lined the wall. Mom smiling in the garden, Dad holding a fishing rod, Eric and me at the county fair. Every picture felt like proof that we'd once been something worth saving. But that morning, all I felt was distance. They'd made up their minds long before the conversation started. The meeting wasn't to discuss, it was to pressure me into surrendering. I sat on the edge of the couch and thought about how easily love turns into entitlement. Eric's loan wasn't my responsibility, yet the way he said "we" made it sound like I'd signed those papers with him. And Paula. She'd always been skilled at making guilt sound reasonable. The phone rang once, then stopped. When I checked, it was a missed call from Eric. No voicemail, just his number sitting there like a warning. I turned it face down on the table. Outside, the wind had picked up. It rattled the windows and made the old porch swing creak. That sound used to comfort me. Now it felt like a reminder of how alone I was, in defending something everyone else saw as worthless. I made tea and sat by the window until the light started to fade. The field stretched out into pale gray distance, empty and still. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, then nothing. I told myself it was over, that they'd cool down, that family arguments don't always mean hatred. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel something shifting, like a door closing slowly but firmly. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. Just one line. They want the house. I can't let them have it. The pen's scratch on paper felt louder than the words themselves. When I went to bed, the house made its usual night sounds, the settling wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sigh of old pipes. It felt alive, loyal, like it had protected me through storms and heartbreaks alike. I whispered into the dark, "They won't take you." But the truth is, I wasn't sure who I was talking to, the house or myself. The moonlight spilled through the curtains, silver and cold, stretching across the floor where Dad's old boots still sat by the door. I thought about what Paula had said, that I'd regret saying no. Maybe I would. Maybe she already had. A plan. The clock ticked on, each second sounding heavier than the last, until I realized regret wasn't what I felt at all. It was anticipation. The morning light hit the kitchen first, slipping through the torn curtain and landing on the same table where Eric had slammed his hand 2 nights ago. I stared at that spot for a while, tracing the faint mark his coffee cup had left on the wood. The silence felt too still, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. I'm Catherine Ford, 52 years old, retired nurse, and this house, it's all I have. Not in the sad, lonely way people sometimes mean it. I mean it literally. This is everything I've kept that no one could take. I spent most of my life in hospitals, watching strangers fade while machines kept count of their breaths. When Mom got sick, I came home to take care of her. When Dad followed a year later, I stayed because there was no one else left who would. My brothers and sister had their city lives, their vacations, their excuses. They sent cards, sometimes flowers, and thought that meant love. I never asked for thanks. That's the curse of being the dependable one. People forget you're still human. You just keep showing up until showing up becomes who you are. The farmhouse creaks when the wind shifts. The walls are thin, but the smell of pine never leaves, no matter the season. Dad built most of this place with his own hands. Every nail, every beam holds his fingerprints. Sometimes, when the floors pop at night, I still imagine his boots crossing them. Last winter, I paid off the final mortgage payment. 10 years after they were gone. 10 years of saving, cutting corners, and saying no to anything that wasn't survival. I didn't celebrate. I just stood on the porch, looked out at the frozen fields, and thought, it's mine now. That was supposed to mean peace. It didn't. Eric never cared that I kept the lights on or fixed the roof. Paula never cared that I paid the property tax when they didn't. They only see what they can sell. They walk through this house like it's a product, not a home, not a lifetime. Paula once called it a pile of bricks. I almost told her that bricks were the only things that ever stayed. Instead, I smiled and poured her tea. Sometimes politeness is sharper than anger. I keep the house clean, though it's far from perfect. The paint peels in the hallway. The porch sags just enough to creak when I step out at night. The fence leans to one side, like it's tired of holding everything together. But every flaw is familiar. Every sound reminds me I survived. After breakfast, I walk through the hall and stop by Mom's sewing room. Her machine is still there, covered with an old sheet. The air smells faintly of lavender and dust. She used to hum when she worked, low and steady, a sound that filled the whole house. When she got too weak to sit, I'd thread the needle for her. She'd smile, even when her hands trembled. I thought being needed was the same as being loved. I learned too late that it isn't. By noon, I went down to the basement. The air was cooler, heavy with the scent of metal and earth. Dad's workbench still stood in the corner, tools lined up like soldiers waiting for orders that would never come. And in the far wall sat the old safe, black metal, scratched, with a dial that always stuck halfway through the turn. I hadn't touched it in months. It held some old bonds, deeds, and the kind of papers you only keep because your parents told you they mattered. I don't know why I noticed it right away. Maybe the way light hit it through the tiny basement window. Maybe because something in me already knew. The door wasn't fully closed, just a sliver of shadow where it should have been sealed tight. For a moment, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd left it that way without realizing. But I'm not careless. Not with this house. Not with anything that carries their name. I knelt down and turned the handle. It groaned, metal against metal, like it hadn't been moved in years. Inside, everything looked normal. Papers stacked neatly, yellowed at the edges, the old land deed, Mom's wedding certificate, a few savings bonds wrapped in elastic that had gone brittle. Nothing missing, nothing added. And yet something was wrong. The kind of wrong you can't prove, only feel. Like someone had been there, breathing your air when you weren't around. I checked the locks on the basement door twice before going back upstairs. My chest felt heavy, not from fear, but from a quiet, unfamiliar tension that wouldn't let go. I sat on the couch, staring at the window, watching the trees sway. The branches looked like they were whispering to each other. I could almost hear Paula's voice among them, that smug tone when she said I'd regret saying no. I hadn't forgotten her smile when she said it. That wasn't anger. That was certainty. I tried to tell myself they wouldn't dare come back. The police had warned them after the last incident, but the thought didn't calm me. Because people like Paula don't always need to show up to cause damage. Sometimes they send someone else. That night, I left every light on. I told myself it was because of the creaks, the shifting wind, the usual old house noises. But deep down, I knew I was listening for footsteps. When morning came, the light felt colder. The basement door stood slightly open again, just an inch, enough to let a line of darkness spill across the floor. I didn't move. I just watched it for a long, quiet moment. And then I whispered to the empty air, "Someone's been here." Only the wind answered. But the house felt awake. The phone rang just after dinner, that same low buzz that always makes my stomach tighten before I even see the name. It was Eric. For a second, I thought about letting it ring, but I answered anyway. He sounded soft, rehearsed almost. "Hey, Katie," he said, like nothing had happened. "I've been thinking, maybe I came off too strong last week." I stayed quiet long enough for him to fill the silence. "You know how things get when money's tight," he continued. "We shouldn't fight over something as stupid as property." I could hear Paula in the background, whispering something, her voice sharp even through the static. Eric cleared his throat. "Anyway, the family's thinking of stopping by next weekend, just to talk things over properly. No drama this time, I promise." Something in his tone didn't match the words. Too light, too practiced. Still, I said, "All right, if it's just to talk." He chuckled. "Of course, we'll be civil, you'll see." The line clicked before I could respond. He never said goodbye. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the faint hum on the other end, wondering if apologies are supposed to feel that empty. I wanted to believe him. Part of me still hoped there was a version of Eric who remembered family dinners, Dad's laugh, the sound of Mom's sewing machine late at night. But people like my brother only remember you when they need something. The house felt heavier after that call, like the walls were holding their breath. I made tea and walked through the hallway, letting the floor creak under my feet. It's strange how a house can sound alive when you're alone in it. Every sound reminds you that silence is never really empty. I went into the living room and pulled out the old photo albums from the cabinet. They smelled like dust and faint vanilla, Mom's perfume lingering even after all these years. I sat on the couch, opening one at random. The first picture was of Eric's high school graduation. He was smiling, arms thrown around Dad. I was the one behind the camera. I flipped through the pages, birthdays, barbecues, Christmas mornings, and realized something I hadn't noticed before. I was never in any of them, not once, always behind the lens, making sure everyone else looked perfect. It hit me how invisible I'd made myself for the sake of keeping peace. I traced a finger over one photo. Dad cutting a cake, Mom's hand on his shoulder, Eric laughing beside them. I remembered that night. I was the one who baked that cake after working a 12-hour shift. I'd barely sat down before they were already teasing me for icing it unevenly. It wasn't cruel, just thoughtless, which somehow hurts more, because thoughtlessness doesn't stop. It just grows until it feels normal. I closed the album and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The air had that thick stillness that comes right before a storm. Outside, the crickets were louder than usual. I tried to convince myself that next weekend would be peaceful. Maybe Eric really did want to make things right. Maybe Paula had convinced him to be decent. But even thinking that felt like lying to myself. When I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Eric's voice, that false warmth layered over something colder. I knew him too well to mistake it for kindness. He wanted something. He always did. The clock read 11:47 when I finally got up and went to the window. The sky was dark, no moon tonight, just heavy clouds hanging low. The air smelled like rain. I stood there for a while, listening to the faint hum of the windmill out back. It's funny how memory works. One small sound can drag you years backward. I remembered being 10, standing by the same window, waiting for Dad to come home from town. He was late that night too. Mom had said, "Don't worry, Katie, men just lose track of time." I wonder what she'd say now if she saw what her son had turned into. The house made a sound then, a slow creak from somewhere near the porch. I froze. It could have been the wind, but the rhythm was wrong. 2 slow steps, then silence. I didn't move, just watched the curtains shift slightly as if touched by air that shouldn't have been there. After a minute, it stopped. Nothing but the faint tick of the clock again. Maybe it was an animal, I told myself. But the sound had weight to it, deliberate, human. I sat back on the couch and stared at the front door. Everything looked normal, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already crossed the line. I picked up the album again and turned to the last page. It was blank, just an empty sleeve waiting for a photo that was never taken. I almost laughed at how fitting that felt. Around midnight, I turned off the lamp. The dark came fast, pressing against the windows. And then, suddenly, light. Headlights. They swept across the living room wall, bright and slow, tracing the furniture like hands searching for something. The beam passed once, twice, then stopped. The engine outside idled low, steady, patient. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The light shifted again, flickering across the window, then pulled away down the road. Gravel crunched, silence returned. But I stayed sitting there, staring at that window long after the lights were gone. Because sometimes you can feel when something's coming for you, long before it arrives. The sound came first, sharp and wrong, like wood splintering under weight. I thought it was the wind at the porch until I heard Paula's voice through the door. "Open up, Catherine. You can end this right now." I froze halfway down the hall. Then came Eric's voice, louder, angrier. "Hand over the documents, Katie. We're done playing nice." My pulse started pounding in my ears. I looked at the clock on the wall. 11:43. Too late for visitors, too early for nightmares. They banged again, harder this time. The porch light threw their shadows across the window. 4 of them. I recognized Eric's stance even from behind the glass. Shoulders squared, fists tight. Paula stood slightly behind him, her arms crossed like this was just another family argument she planned to win. Then one of the others lifted something heavy. The crack of glass filled the night. I backed up fast, my hands shaking but my thoughts weirdly clear. They were really doing this. They were actually breaking in. I ran to the study, the only room with a solid door and a lock that still worked. The moment I turned the key, another window shattered somewhere near the kitchen. Eric shouted, "You'll wish you hadn't done this, Catherine!" I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My phone was on the desk. I fumbled with it, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher's voice was calm. "What's your emergency?" "My family's trying to break into my house," I whispered. "They've already broken the windows." "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on the way. Don't go near them." I could hear them moving through the hallway now. Heavy boots, glass crunching underfoot. Paula laughed. You're making this worse for yourself. Just open the door and we'll talk like adults. Talk. That word almost made me laugh. If she wanted to talk, she wouldn't have brought baseball bats. Something hit the study door, hard enough to rattle the hinges. I clutched the phone tighter. Eric's voice came through, slurred with rage. All we need is the paperwork, Katie. You can keep your precious furniture. We just want what's fair. Fair. That word burned worse than any threat. The second hit splintered part of the frame. I moved to the far corner, behind Dad's old desk, holding my breath like a child hiding from thunder. The dispatcher's voice came again. Stay where you are. Police are 3 minutes out. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. They kept shouting, alternating between threats and fake sympathy. Come on, sis, Eric said. You know you can't handle this alone. Paula's voice followed, colder. You don't want to make enemies out of family. I wanted to scream back, but I didn't. I stayed quiet. Let them talk to the silence they'd created. Another smash, this time the living room lamp. Maybe the framed pictures. I could hear laughter mixed with glass breaking. It didn't sound human anymore, just desperate. My hands stopped shaking. I remember that part clearly. Somewhere between fear and fury, something inside me went still. Then sirens, distant at first, then closer. The sound made them scatter. The footsteps faded, the front door slammed, an engine roared to life outside. By the time the flashing red and blue lights painted the walls, they were gone. The officer at the door looked barely 30, polite and serious. He stepped over broken glass, scanning the mess. Did you see their faces? He asked. I didn't have to, I said. I know who they were. He nodded slowly, writing something on his clipboard. You're lucky they didn't hurt you, he said. I looked at the broken window, the jagged edges shining under the porch light. Luck has nothing to do with it, I said quietly. They didn't come to talk. They came to take. He walked through the house, checking rooms, shining his flashlight across the walls. Every corner looked like a memory torn apart. Mom's vase shattered, Dad's chair knocked over, the family photos face down on the floor. When he came back, he hesitated before speaking. You might want to check your father's safe, he said. It looks like someone's been down there. I felt my stomach drop. That cold weight from before returned, heavier this time. The basement. He gave me a reassuring nod. We'll file the report tonight. Lock up, stay with a friend if you can. I just nodded, though I knew I wouldn't leave. This house was mine. I wasn't running from the ghosts that shared my blood. When the cruiser lights faded, the silence returned thicker than before. I stood in the hallway, surrounded by shards that caught the faint glow of the street lamp. My reflection appeared in one cracked photo frame, my face cut into pieces by the break. I looked older, harder, but still here. The wind slipped through the broken glass, cold against my skin. Somewhere below my feet, the basement door creaked, and for the first time that night, I realized they weren't just after money. They were after something they believed was still hidden here. I whispered into the dark, "You won't find it." But my voice sounded small in the empty room. The house didn't answer. The quiet hum of the night, steady and waiting. The basement smelled like damp earth and old iron when I opened the door. The flashlight beam shook a little in my hand, dust swirling in the light. I didn't even have to kneel to see it. The safe door was wide open. I could tell before I reached it that something was wrong. The papers inside weren't stacked the way I left them. The envelopes were torn. Dad's handwriting on the labels had been smeared, as if someone's fingers had dragged across the ink. I crouched down and started going through everything slowly, one piece at a time. The old bonds were gone. The deeds, too. Even the velvet pouch that held Mom's jewelry, the one I'd promised myself I'd never touch, was missing. For a moment, I just stared into the empty space where it used to sit, trying to remember if I'd moved it myself. I hadn't. I would have remembered. I sat on the cold floor, my knees aching, and tried to breathe. It wasn't just theft. It was violation. Every piece in that safe meant something. Every page carried my parents' trust. I called the police again. The same young officer from the night before answered. He sounded tired, like he'd already filed this under domestic dispute. He promised to send someone by. When they came, they looked around half-heartedly, asked if I'd given anyone the combination. I told them no. They nodded, but didn't write much down. Before leaving, one of them said, "Sometimes family disagreements can get messy, ma'am. Maybe wait a few days before assuming the worst." I didn't answer. The moment the cruiser pulled away, I felt that same heaviness again, the kind that fills a house after everyone leaves but their presence stays. I called Eric. He picked up on the second ring. "Eric," I said quietly, "someone's been in Dad's safe. Mom's jewelry and the papers are gone." He didn't hesitate. "You sure you didn't misplace them?" "You know I didn't," he sighed. "Katie, maybe you just forgot. You've been under a lot of stress. First the break-in, now this." His voice had that fake sympathy that always comes right before a lie. "You think I'm losing it," I said. "I think you're tired," he replied. "You need rest." And then casually he added, "You should probably stop calling the police. They'll start thinking you're paranoid." He hung up before I could speak. I stared at the phone, feeling the sting settle in my chest. By afternoon, the rumors had started. Mrs. Harlan from next door stopped by with a pie she happened to bake too much of. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the house like she was checking for damage, or maybe confirming something she'd heard. "You're holding up okay, dear?" she asked. "I heard the family's been having trouble." I forced a small smile. "We're fine." She hesitated at the door. "You know, sometimes stress can make you misplace things. My sister went through that after her husband died. Poor thing was convinced someone was stealing from her." That one sentence told me everything. Eric had been busy. By evening, 3 more calls came. None from friends, just people pretending to check in, all using the same soft, careful tone people use around the unwell. My hands shook as I poured myself tea. The isolation hit harder than the theft. It's one thing to lose objects, it's another to lose credibility. I walked through the house in silence, checking every window latch, every drawer, every corner. Nothing else was missing, but everything felt violated. I went back to the basement. The air was colder now, the smell of dust heavier. I sat by the open safe again, the metal cold against my palm. I started gathering the remaining papers just to feel some order again. That's when I noticed it. A single torn sheet caught between the bottom corner and the wall. I pulled it out carefully. It was from Dad's will. Most of the text was faded, but one line was clear. "An undisclosed trust held in Catherine's name to be transferred upon." The rest was ripped away. My heart thudded once, sharp and deep. That word, trust, echoed louder than anything else in the room. Sometimes the truth hides in what's missing. What would you do if the people you trusted most took everything and called you crazy for noticing? The knock came just before noon. It wasn't frantic like before. It was polite, measured, official. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door, half expecting another neighbor with a fresh rumor to deliver. But the woman standing there wasn't from the neighborhood. She wore a navy jacket with a county badge clipped to the pocket and held a clipboard like a shield. "Mrs. Ford?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said. "My name's Sandra Whitmore. I'm with Adult Protective Services. I received a referral about your well-being." The words hit slow, like raindrops before a storm. "About my what?" I asked. She gave a practiced smile, the kind meant to calm people who were about to be insulted. "Nothing to worry about," she said. "Just a standard wellness check." I let her in. The house looked tidy. I'd cleaned that morning out of habit, not knowing it would turn into evidence. She walked through the hallway, eyes scanning everything. The furniture, the framed photos, the half-empty cup of tea on the table. She made small talk while taking notes. "Beautiful property. Been here long?" "All my life," I said. "My parents built this place." "Anyone else living here?" "No." "Any support nearby? Family? Neighbors you rely on?" I felt my throat tighten. "Not anymore." She nodded, scribbling something down. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the tone, that calm pity she'd probably practiced in 100 other homes before mine. When she finally sat, she folded her hands. "I understand this may feel uncomfortable," she said. "We received a report expressing concern about your ability to manage the property alone." "From who?" I asked. She hesitated, a second too long to be innocent. "I'm not allowed to disclose that," she said softly. But she didn't need to. I already knew. "Eric," I said quietly. She looked at me the way a nurse looks at a patient talking in circles. "I don't know anything about that," she said. I laughed once under my breath. "Of course you don't." She shifted in her chair. "Your brother mentioned—" She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. I raised an eyebrow. "My brother mentioned what?" Her face stiffened. "That you've been under a lot of stress since your parents' passing. He's concerned the property is too much for you to maintain." I looked around the room. The curtains were clean, the plants watered, the floors swept. Nothing here looked like chaos. Nothing looked unstable. Just me, the woman they wanted to paint as fragile. "I'm fine," I said. "I've been fine for years. The only thing breaking down around here is the trust I had in my family." She offered another small smile. "People mean well, Mrs. Ford." "No," I said softly. "They mean ownership." She didn't write that part down. Instead, she asked to see my medication list, my pantry, even my mail. I let her. If she was going to come into my life uninvited, I'd make sure she saw the whole picture. When she finished, she stood and closed her folder. "Everything looks okay," she said slowly. "I'll be filing this as resolved for now." "For now," I repeated. She gave a polite laugh, the kind that hides unfinished business. On her way out, she paused at the door. "One thing," she added carefully. "This might not mean anything, but I saw a note in your file mentioning that your brother filed an intent with the county regarding the property. It's not finalized, just an inquiry about sale eligibility." I stared at her. "Filed what?" "Intent," she said again. "It's a preliminary form. Sometimes families explore options before making decisions. It doesn't mean a sale is happening." I wanted to ask how that could even be possible, but the words didn't come. She smiled that same gentle, trained smile and stepped off the porch. Her car door shut, the engine started, and then she was gone, leaving tire marks in the gravel that felt deeper than they should have been. I stood in the doorway long after she left, the breeze curling around me like it knew something I didn't. Filed intent. Those words kept echoing in my head. It wasn't enough for them to break into my home or steal what was mine. Now they wanted to erase me from the paperwork, too. Make me look like the confused old woman standing in her parents' house pretending it was still hers. The humiliation didn't come from the officer. It came from the realization that Eric had already built his story, and the world would believe it before they believed me. I closed the door quietly and leaned against it, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. Then I whispered to the empty room, "If they want me gone, they'll have to do more than file paperwork." The air felt still again, too still, the kind of silence that doesn't end until something shatters it. I went upstairs that morning without a plan. The air felt heavier than usual, carrying the faint scent of dust and fabric that never quite left my mother's old sewing room. The door creaked the same way it used to when I'd bring her tea. For years, I couldn't make myself go inside. Now, I needed something to keep my mind steady. The room looked exactly as she'd left it. Threads lined up by color, a pair of glasses resting beside the machine, and a fabric swatch still pinned to the cushion like she'd only stepped away for a minute. Sunlight cut through the blinds, landing across the table in soft strips. It made the dust shimmer like old memories refusing to fade. I started going through the drawers one by one. Old receipts, ribbons, faded photographs. Nothing valuable. Nothing that explained the mess my life had become. But I kept searching, the quiet of the house pressing closer with every open drawer. At the bottom of a wooden chest near the window, I found a stack of fabric folded neatly. When I lifted it, something thin slid to the floor. An envelope, yellowed and brittle. It had my name written on it, not in my mother's handwriting, My father's. My hands trembled before I even opened it. I sat down on the stool beside the sewing table and traced the letters once with my thumb. Catherine. He always wrote my name with care, sharp, clean strokes, the kind of handwriting that didn't waver even when his hands had started to. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. Inside was a folded letter, and behind it, another document stamped and signed. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, the same as the drawers in his study. "Sweetheart," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means what I feared has already begun." I stopped breathing. "I know your brother," it said, "and I know the kind of men he keeps close. He'll tell you it's about fairness, but it never is. He'll come for the land. Maybe not right away, but one day he'll decide he's owed more than he earned. Don't let him talk you out of what's rightfully yours." I had to put the paper down for a moment. The sound of my pulse was louder than the wind outside. My father had seen this coming. Every word felt like he was sitting beside me again, steady and quiet, trying to prepare me for the storm I hadn't yet faced. I picked the letter back up and kept reading. "You took care of us, Katie. You stayed when everyone else left. That's why I changed the deed before I passed. The land, the house, everything. It belongs to you alone. There's a notarized addendum enclosed. Keep it safe, and if they ever challenge it, you'll know what to do." The last line read, "You were the one who never asked for anything. That's why you deserve it all." I covered my mouth with my hand, the tears coming before I could stop them. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the property. It was the confirmation that someone, at least once in my life, had seen me for who I was, not what I could provide. The addendum was real, signed, sealed, dated a few months before he died. The stamp was faded but visible, and the notary's mark left no room for doubt. For years, I'd believed I was just holding on to a memory, defending something sentimental. But it had always been mine, legally, entirely, deliberately mine. I sat there for a long time, letter in one hand, tears drying on my face. The room felt different now, as if my mother and father were both there, standing quietly behind me, waiting for me to understand. Every insult, every lie, every whisper about my state of mind. They all twisted into something smaller, something that no longer carried weight. Eric had lied to everyone. He'd lied to me, but my father had left me the truth, and he'd buried it where only someone who loved this house enough to stay would ever find it. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it against my chest. "All right, Dad," I whispered. "I'll handle it." The wind outside picked up, brushing against the window like a faint reply. And for the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty. It felt awake. I didn't sleep that night. The letter sat on the kitchen table, lit by a single lamp, its edges trembling each time the wind slipped through the old window frame. I kept reading the words over and over until they stopped feeling real. By sunrise, I'd already made up my mind. There was one person who could tell me if my father's letter would hold up in court. Mr. Halpern, the family attorney. He'd handled my parents' estate years ago. I remembered his voice from those long hospital days, steady, polite, the kind of man who never said more than necessary. If my father trusted him, maybe I still could. I called his office right when it opened. The secretary recognized my name immediately and told me to hold. After a short pause, his voice came on the line. "Catherine Ford," he said slowly, like he hadn't expected to hear it. "It's been a long time." "It has," I said. "I found something. A letter. From my father. He mentioned an addendum. Notarized. I think you might have a copy." There was silence on the other end, then a quiet sigh. "I was wondering when that would surface," he said. "You knew about it?" "I drafted it," he said. "Your father insisted it stay sealed unless you came to me yourself. He wanted to protect you." The words hit deeper than I expected. I asked if we could meet, and he told me to come in right away. His office hadn't changed. Same mahogany shelves, same faint smell of leather and dust. He shook my hand, then opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file. My name was typed neatly on the label. He read through the papers quietly while I sat across from him, my heart thudding like I'd been caught doing something wrong. When he finally looked up, his expression was firm but kind. "It's genuine," he said. "The addendum is signed, witnessed, and notarized. It leaves the property solely to you. There's no legal ambiguity." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to air filling my lungs. "Then it's over," I said. He shook his head. "Not quite. If your brother's already made claims, you'll need to be cautious. Don't confront him yet. Let him think he's in control. Gather everything: calls, messages, any proof of harassment or manipulation. Once you have enough, we'll act." I nodded slowly. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the one that made sense. Silence had always been my armor. Now it would be my weapon. When I got home, I found my phone still flashing from missed calls. 3 from Eric, 1 from Paula. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went online and ordered a small voice recorder, same-day delivery. By evening, it was clipped beneath my phone case. The first call came after dark. Eric's tone was smooth, practiced. "Katie," he said, "heard you've been digging into Dad's things. That's not healthy." "I'm fine," I said, "just organizing paperwork." "You always were sentimental," he said. "Listen, all this can go away. Sell the place, take your share. We'll settle everything clean." "There's nothing to settle," I said quietly. The silence stretched. Then he laughed under his breath. "You think you're smarter than me now? Don't forget, I know you. You freeze under pressure, always have." I said nothing. He waited, then hung up. I replayed that conversation 3 times before bed, memorizing his tone. It wasn't worry, it was fear, disguised as arrogance. He was hiding something bigger than the house. The next morning, I called a friend who worked at the local credit union, an old patient from my nursing days who owed me a favor. Her voice lowered when I asked if she'd heard Eric's name come up recently. "Keep this between us," she said. "But yes, he's in deep. Owes a lender out of Lincoln more than he can cover. Not a bank either, the kind that makes people disappear when they can't pay." I thanked her and hung up. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, so that was it. It wasn't about family or fairness. It was about survival. He wasn't trying to take my house. He was trying to sell it fast enough to save himself. I began recording every call, every voicemail. Paula's tone grew nastier with each one, pretending concern 1 minute, calling me unstable the next. They were both getting desperate. Late that evening, as I sat in the study with the lights off, my phone rang again. Eric's voice came through, low and sharp. "You've got 3 days, Katie, or things get ugly." The line went dead, and in the silence that followed, I pressed record again, this time for me. The knock came just after noon. Not frantic this time. Polite, measured, rehearsed. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Eric stood on the porch wearing his best little brother smile. Paula was behind him, arms full of a pie she didn't bake, and between them stood a man in a gray suit holding a leather folder. "Afternoon," Eric said lightly, like we hadn't spoken threats into the phone 3 nights ago. "Mind if we come in? Thought it was time we talked things through." I stepped aside without a word. The air changed the moment they crossed the threshold. Too much perfume. Too many lies. The man in the suit nodded politely. "I'm Mr. Daniels," he said. "I'm a local notary. Just here to witness a few signatures if necessary." I smiled faintly and gestured toward the kitchen. "Of course, let's sit." The table was already set for tea. Cups, spoons, sugar, the same china my mother used to use on Sundays. Paula's eyes flicked around the room, scanning for the damage her last visit had caused. Everything had been repaired, but not forgotten. She set the pie down with a soft thud. Eric leaned back in the chair like he owned it. "I've been thinking," he began. "Maybe we all said things we didn't mean. Family shouldn't fight over a house, right?" He looked around like he expected applause. Paula added sweetly, We just want to make this official, Katie, so no one gets hurt. The notary cleared his throat and opened his folder. I was told this was a mutual settlement, he said. Paula smiled at him, then at me. Yes, Catherine's decided to transfer partial rights to her siblings, just to keep peace in the family. I poured tea slowly, the liquid steady even though my pulse wasn't. Is that what I decided? I asked quietly. Eric's eyes hardened for a split second, then softened again. Come on, Katie, let's not make this hard. You'll still have the house for now. It's just a formality. I set the teapot down gently and looked at the man in the suit. Would you excuse us a moment? He hesitated, then nodded and stepped toward the porch to take a call. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost solid. Paula broke it first. This isn't about cheating you, she said, stirring her tea even though she hadn't added sugar. It's about fairness. Eric's been through a lot. You have the means to help him. That's what family does. Family doesn't break into homes, I said evenly. Her hand froze mid-stir. Eric forced a laugh. That again. You really think I'd do something like that? You did, I said. And you stole from Dad's safe. He leaned forward, smiling in that practiced way he always did before lying. Dad didn't leave you anything that mattered. You just want to believe you're special. For a moment, I let his words hang in the air. Then I reached for the sugar bowl, letting the spoon clink softly against the porcelain. I know what Dad left me, I said, and I know what he didn't leave you. Paula's tone sharpened, just slightly. You can't prove anything. The will you have, it won't hold. It's not even the right version. I looked up. The right version? She blinked, realizing what she'd said, but it was too late. Her face twitched, trying to backtrack. I mean, people draft multiple copies. Eric cut her off, angry now. Just stop talking, Paula. I smiled politely and stood to refill their cups, my phone recording every word from the counter behind me. Paula followed me with her eyes, her mask slipping. You think that letter changes anything? She said under her breath. It's a fake. Eric made sure of that. I turned back to her, the teapot steady in my hand. What did you just say? She froze, realizing again that she'd said too much. Eric shot her a look sharp enough to cut glass. Enough, he snapped. We're done here. The notary returned from outside, confused by the tension. Everything all right? Eric forced another smile. Yeah, misunderstanding. We'll reschedule. Paula grabbed her purse, muttering, She's not worth it. As they walked toward the door, Eric paused and looked back at me. For the first time, he looked nervous. I didn't say a word. I just stared until he looked away. When the door closed behind them, I sat back down and let the quiet return. The phone was still recording, its small red light blinking on the counter. Their voices were all there. Every lie, every slip, every piece of proof I'd ever need. I listened to the recording once, then again, each time catching more than I had before. By the third play, I realized I was smiling. The first real smile in weeks. It's strange how calm you feel when fear finally ends. Would you forgive them, or would you wait? The courthouse smelled like paper and polish, the kind of sterile air that makes you second-guess every decision you've ever made. I stood near the window, hands folded, the letter from my father tucked neatly inside the folder against my chest. It felt lighter than it should have, considering what it carried. Eric was already seated at the front with Paula beside him. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He just leaned back in his chair like a man certain the world still bent his way. Paula whispered something into his ear, and he smirked. I'd seen that same look at every family dinner, the one that always came right before a lie. When the bailiff called my name, I stepped forward. The courtroom was small, quiet, the kind of room where words don't just echo, they linger. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Ford, he said, you're here today contesting the current deed of ownership for the property at 214 West Orchard Lane, correct? Yes, Your Honor, I said. I have proof the property was left solely to me by my late father. Eric's attorney jumped in, all confidence and condescension. Your Honor, we've seen no credible documentation to support that claim. The letter Ms. Ford presented could easily be fabricated. My client, the judge lifted a hand. I'll determine what's credible, counselor. I handed over the folder, watching as the clerk walked it to the bench. Inside were two things: my father's notarized addendum and a printed transcript of the recorded conversation. The truth, captured in ink and voice. The judge unfolded the letter first, scanning it slowly. The silence in the room thickened until even the hum of the air conditioner felt loud. After a long pause, he looked up. This addendum bears an authentic notary seal, he said. It's dated 4 months before the will in question. Mr. Halpern's name appears as witness. Eric's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Paula's hand slipped from Eric's arm. Then came the recordings. I'd labeled each one carefully: timestamps, dates, context. When the first audio clip began to play, the sound of my brother's voice filled the room. You've got 3 days, Katie, or things get ugly. The judge's brow furrowed. The second clip played. Paula's voice, sweet and venomous all at once. It's a fake. Eric made sure of that. Her face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks so fast it looked like someone had pulled the life right out of her. The judge leaned back, exhaling slowly. Mr. Ford, he said, is there any explanation you'd like to provide for these statements? Eric straightened, his jaw tight. That was taken out of context, he said. She's twisting it. You don't know how manipulative she can be. I looked at him and spoke softly. I don't need to twist anything, Eric. You said exactly what you meant. The judge nodded toward the clerk. Please read the relevant section of the notary's affidavit aloud. The clerk stood and began to read. The property located at 214 West Orchard Lane shall remain in sole ownership of my daughter, Catherine Ford, as a final amendment to my estate to ensure her continued residence and security. When she finished, the room fell completely silent, the kind of silence that feels like justice walking in quietly, not with applause, but with truth. The judge folded his hands. I find in favor of the plaintiff, he said. The property is hereby confirmed in full ownership to Ms. Ford. All other claims are void. He turned to Eric and Paula. You are to vacate the premises within 10 days. Furthermore, he paused, his tone hardening. Be aware that providing false testimony or forged documentation to this court constitutes perjury, and perjury carries a sentence. Eric's face flickered, a crack in his mask of confidence. Paula looked down, her fingers trembling as she gripped her purse. I didn't say a word. I just gathered my papers, nodded respectfully to the judge, and walked toward the door. The hallway outside felt warmer than the courtroom, brighter somehow. People passed me without a glance, unaware of the war that had just ended. As I reached the exit, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Tired eyes, steady hands, the faint trace of a smile. For the first time, I saw a woman who hadn't just survived her family. She'd outlasted them. By the end of the week, everyone knew. I didn't have to say a word. The story carried itself. The courthouse had been quiet that morning, but in a town like ours, silence never lasts long. At the grocery store, people suddenly remembered how to smile at me again. Mrs. Donnelly from down the street reached out, her voice soft. We're so sorry, Catherine. We didn't know what they were doing to you. I nodded, thanked her, and kept walking. There wasn't anger left anymore, just a kind of tired understanding. People believe what's easiest until they can't. I passed the post office, where the clerk who once avoided eye contact now called out, Morning, Miss Ford, like nothing had happened. Even the mayor's wife stopped me outside the bakery to say, You handled it with such grace, I don't think I could have. I smiled politely, but inside I wanted to ask where all that grace had been when I was being called unstable. Still, I didn't. Some victories are best left quiet. Eric's name started disappearing from the dealership ads the next day. Rumors spread that he'd been fired after management discovered his financial discrepancies. The theft charges from my report had made their way through the system faster than he expected. Paula stopped showing up to town meetings. Even her perfect hair couldn't hide humiliation. It would have been easy to enjoy it, to scroll through the whispers and smirks, to relish every look that once belonged to pity and now carried guilt. But I didn't. Instead, I spent my mornings tending the garden, the same one my father used to keep neat enough to make the neighbors jealous. The soil felt different now, lighter, freer somehow. Every seed I planted felt like closure. One afternoon, as I watered the roses, I saw Mrs. Adams leaning over the fence. She'd been one of the first to believe Eric's lies. Now her face was pale, her voice hesitant. "Catherine, we should have stood by you. Everyone should have." I looked at her and said gently, "It's all right. You know the truth now." She nodded, embarrassed, and walked away. Forgiveness isn't something you announce. It's something that happens quietly when the world has already punished them for you. I didn't post anything online. I didn't make statements or smile for sympathy. The silence became my power. And the more I stayed quiet, the more they talked about how calm I was, how dignified. It was strange hearing my name paired with respect again, like people had forgotten how cruel they'd been just weeks earlier. Still, I didn't hold it against them. Small towns don't thrive on truth. They thrive on stories. And now, mine finally belonged to me. At night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the lights go out one by one across the valley. The air smelled like rain, the kind that cleans everything it touches. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. That peace lasted 3 days. Then the mail arrived. There was no return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting I recognized. Immediately, Eric's. I stood at the kitchen counter, the letter trembling in my hands before I even opened it. Inside was a single page. His words were uneven, rushed. "Please, I need your help." I read it twice. No apology, no explanation. Just those 5 words. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the envelopes across the counter. For a moment, I just stared at them, wondering how long it would take for him to realize that help and forgiveness aren't the same thing. He asked to meet somewhere public. That alone told me he was afraid. When I walked into the cafe, he was already there. Back corner, slouched, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He looked smaller somehow. Not younger, just deflated. The kind of man who'd run out of excuses. When he saw me, he half stood, then sat again, pretending he hadn't. "Katie," he said quietly, like my name was something he had to borrow permission to use. I sat down across from him. The sun through the window hit his face, highlighting every sleepless night he'd earned. "I didn't know who else to call," he started. "They're saying they'll press charges unless I pay back the loan." I stayed quiet. He took a deep breath, rubbing his palms together. "I just need a co-signer. You don't even have to pay anything, I swear. I'll handle it. I just need your name." His voice cracked near the end, the first honest sound I'd heard from him in years. For a moment, I just studied him, the man who once called me delusional for protecting what was mine. Now he looked like a boy again, one who'd burned every bridge, and couldn't understand why no one was building him another. He slid the paper toward me. "I know I don't deserve your help," he said, "but please, if I don't get this signed, I'll lose everything." I glanced at the form. It was official, stamped, cold, the same way his lies had been when he filed those false claims about me. His handwriting beside the blanks was shaky, desperate. For a moment, I saw my father's penmanship in my mind. Neat, steady, proud. The contrast hurt more than I expected. "Eric," I said quietly, "do you remember what you called me when this all started?" He blinked, confused. "You said I was selfish," I continued. "You said I'd rather watch the family fall apart than help you." He looked down, lips tightening. "I was angry," he muttered. "You wouldn't understand what I was dealing with." "I understood perfectly," I said. "You wanted everything, and you thought guilt would get you there." The waitress came by with the check, setting it between us like punctuation. I smiled and thanked her. Eric didn't even look up. You know, I said softly, I used to think helping family meant giving more than I could afford. But now I realize it means knowing when to stop. I pushed the paper back across the table toward him. The sound of it sliding across the wood was louder than his next breath. Catherine, please, he whispered. I'm begging you. For the first time, his voice wasn't manipulative. It was small. And that was worse, somehow. I leaned forward slightly. You made your choices, I said. And so did I. He didn't move. His eyes stayed on the paper like it might disappear if he stared hard enough. The silence stretched between us. Long, thin, final. When I finally stood, my chair made a soft sound against the tile. I reached for my purse, pulled out a $5 bill, and set it beside the check. That should cover the coffee, I said quietly. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His hands were shaking too much. I turned and walked toward the door. The bell above it chimed as I stepped outside. The sunlight hit my face. Warm, clean, unapologetic. Behind me, through the glass, Eric still sat frozen. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for him. I just felt free. Autumn came quietly this year. The kind of quiet that doesn't need to prove itself. The trees around the farmhouse turned gold at their own pace, and for once I didn't feel the urge to hurry them. Most mornings I woke before sunrise, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was something sacred about the sound of coffee dripping while the fields waited in silence outside. The house didn't creak from footsteps that weren't mine anymore. It breathed with me, calm, unbothered, whole again. I started spending more time in the garden. The soil had gone firm from the cold, but I worked it gently, loosening what the frost had hardened. The roses, stubborn things, still held color against the wind. They reminded me of how survival doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's just the act of staying. A few neighbors began stopping by again, this time with pie, not pity. They stood at the gate, smiling nervously, as if waiting for me to mention what happened. I never did. Instead, I asked about their families, their kids, their lives. Letting them talk made it easier for both of us. Forgiveness doesn't always require words. Sometimes silence is the only language that fits. Inside, the farmhouse had become my project. I started restoring the furniture piece by piece. The oak table my father carved when I was a child. The old rocking chair that still carried my mother's scent. Each brush of varnish felt like sealing something back into place, something time had tried to erase. The air here was different now, clean, unburdened. It no longer carried the weight of betrayal or the echo of arguments behind closed doors. I could open a window and not fear what might come in. For the first time in years, home meant peace. I began volunteering at the local clinic on Thursdays. The nurses there didn't know my story, or if they did, they were kind enough to pretend they didn't. I handed out forms, made coffee, comforted old women who reminded me of myself. One of them, Mrs. Tate, squeezed my hand one afternoon and said, "You've got a calm soul. You can tell when someone's seen storms." I smiled and said softly, "I've seen a few." Driving back from the clinic each evening, I'd pass the field where my father once taught me how to drive. The dirt road was uneven, the same one Eric used to complain about fixing. Now, I liked it that way. Imperfect, honest. It felt like proof that life didn't need polishing to be beautiful. Sometimes sitting on the porch at dusk, I thought about what revenge had turned out to be. Not the kind you see in movies, not screaming or burning bridges or proving anyone wrong. It was quieter than that. Revenge, for me, was waking up and not thinking about them first. It was laughter returning in small doses. It was planting instead of plotting. It was peace, stubborn, steady peace. The world moved on without ceremony. Paula sold her house. Eric's name faded from town gossip. I didn't follow the details. Some stories aren't meant to be retold, just released. That evening, as the sky turned a bruised shade of pink, I sat by the kitchen window, watching the light scatter across the fields. The kettle began to whistle, slow and familiar. I poured my tea, breathing in the steam like it carried everything I'd survived. Then there was a knock at the door. Soft, polite. When I opened it, no one stood there, only an envelope lying on the porch. It had my lawyer's name printed neatly in the corner. I brought it inside, my hand steady as I tore the seal open. Inside was a single document, the sale deed. My name, written clearly in black ink. No shared claim, no dispute, just mine. I leaned back against the counter, closing my eyes for a moment. The house around me felt alive, almost like it was exhaling with me. I smiled, not out of triumph, but relief. The fight was finally over. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain through the open window. The leaves rustled against the fence, whispering softly. And in that stillness, I realized something my father must have known long before I did. Peace doesn't arrive with noise. It settles quietly. And when it does, it never leaves. The drive out to the cemetery felt longer than I remembered. Maybe because I wasn't rushing anywhere this time. The road wound through fields of fading yellow, the air crisp enough to sting a little when I rolled the window down. When I finally parked by the gate, the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I walked the narrow path between the stones, my shoes brushing against dry leaves that crackled like distant applause. It had been years since I'd come here. Maybe I wasn't ready before. Maybe I didn't know what I wanted to say. Their graves sat side by side under a maple tree that had begun to shed early. The headstones were simple. My father's name cleanly carved, my mother's softened by rain and time. I stood there for a moment, holding the white roses close to my chest. Then I knelt, placing them gently at the base of her stone. "Hi, Mom," I said quietly. My voice barely made it past the wind. "I know you always liked these, fresh ones, not from the store." I smiled faintly. It was strange, speaking into stillness, but it felt right, like she was listening the way she used to, patient, unhurried. I turned to my father's side. "Dad," I whispered, "you were right. About all of it." The words came easier than I expected. He had seen what I couldn't back then. The cracks, the greed, the small betrayals that grew into something larger. I used to think he was too cautious. Now I realized he was protecting what he'd built, what he hoped would last. I brushed away a few leaves clinging to the stone. For a moment, I let my hand rest there. It was cool under my palm, grounding. "I kept the land," I said. "I kept the house, too." The wind shifted, carrying a faint rustle through the grass, as if the world had nodded in approval. I sat there for a while, letting the silence fill the spaces between my thoughts. I thought about Eric, about Paula, about the mess they made and the pieces I had to pick up. There was a time when their names could make my hands shake. Now they didn't. The weight had gone somewhere else, dissolved maybe, or replaced by something lighter. I realized I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't wish them harm or hope for punishment. I just didn't carry them with me. That was enough. Letting go wasn't mercy, it was freedom. The sun had started lowering behind the trees, turning everything gold and soft. It made the stones glow faintly, like the past was something warm instead of cold. I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my knees. The roses caught the light just right, a small, simple beauty that didn't ask for attention. I looked down one last time. "Thank you," I said softly, "for trusting me with it all." The words felt final, but not sad, more like closing a door that should have been closed long ago. As I turned to leave, a quiet calm settled over me, not the kind that fades, but the kind that stays, deep and steady, the kind that tells you you've survived enough, learned enough, become enough. At the gate, I paused and glanced back. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, the kind of colors my mother used to stop cooking just to watch. I smiled to myself, the way she used to when she thought no one was looking. Then I whispered into the wind, "I kept the house." And as the words left my mouth, I knew that was my closure. Evening settles over the farmhouse like a blanket that finally fits. The porch swing creaks under me, slow and steady, keeping time with the wind moving through the trees. It's a soft sound, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but fills the space anyway. I take a sip of tea and let it sit on my tongue for a moment before swallowing. The taste isn't sweet, just warm. That's how I like it now. Simple, unadorned. There was a time when I needed noise to feel alive, constant reminders that I existed. Now, the quiet does that for me. Scout, my old shepherd mix, lies by my feet. He's half asleep, twitching in some dream that probably involves chasing whatever still runs in the fields. Every once in a while, his ear flicks at a sound only he can hear. I smile without realizing it. The night smells like pine and smoke from the neighbor's chimney. Somewhere, an owl calls, low and rhythmic. I used to think peace would be dramatic, something you could announce, something people would notice. But it's quieter than I ever imagined. Peace, I've learned, sounds like breathing without fear. The wind moves through the leaves again, brushing against the porch rail like fingers tracing memory. I close my eyes and listen. Every sound that used to remind me of loneliness now feels like proof that I made it through. The creak of the swing, the hum of distant crickets, the faint rattle of a loose shutter, all of it belongs to me. There was a time when the same noises made me ache, when silence meant being forgotten, when I would fill every gap in the day with chores or thoughts that circled the same pain. I don't need to do that anymore. Now I let the world be still. And in that stillness, I hear myself again. I look out across the fields, the ones I nearly lost. The moonlight catches the tall grass, turning it silver at the edges. It moves like water, calm, deliberate. It took me years to learn that stillness doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means knowing you've already won. I think about everything that brought me here. The betrayals, the courtroom, the long nights wondering if I'd done the right thing. For so long, I carried anger like armor. It protected me, but it also weighed me down. Now, it's gone. Not forgiven exactly, just unnecessary. I lean back and let the swing rock. The wood complains softly under me, like an old friend tired but loyal. The sound makes me laugh a little. Not the kind of laugh that bursts out, but the quiet one that lives somewhere deeper. I reach down and scratch behind Scout's ear. He sighs in his sleep, and I whisper, "We're all right now, aren't we?" He doesn't answer, but I don't need him to. I already know. The porch light flickers once, then steadies. Moths gather near it, drawn to something they'll never quite touch. For years, I was the same. Chasing approval, acceptance, the idea of family that didn't exist the way I wanted it to. Now, I let the light be what it is. I don't chase it anymore. Peace has a sound. It's not silence. It's the small symphony of ordinary things. The swing creaking, the wind sighing, the world turning without asking my permission. It's the absence of voices that once told me I wasn't enough. It's the quiet proof that I am. I look up at the stars, faint but stubborn, and feel that strange, full calm that doesn't need explanation. Everything they took from me, I built again, piece by piece. Not for them, for me. They taught me that peace isn't given, I say softly, watching my breath fade into the night air. It's reclaimed. For a long moment, I just sit there, listening. The wind answers with a whisper through the grass, a sound that feels like agreement. I smile again, smaller this time, and let the world be quiet. If my story found you at a moment when you're fighting for your own peace, thank you for listening. I hope you stay, and maybe share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the quietest revenge is living well.